Hello everybody, this is episode 18 of Dead Money with Dan, the Arfman Arfin. No one's ever actually called me that before, including myself, and I very much doubt that I'll ever do it again. Anyway, wow. So I meant to play, but I didn't. A fellow New York Jew friend was in town. He also no longer lives in New York. But we saw the Grateful Dead at the Sphere, the Grateful Dead and Company. And if you haven't been to the Sphere, wowie zowie. I had heard how sick it was and what an amazing place it is to watch a concert in. Yes, sirree, it was most definitely that. I wasn't a Deadhead growing up, but I listened to them and I liked them enough. Our seats were on the floor in front of the stage as general admission, so in other words, we didn't have seats, we were just standing the whole time, but being on the floor probably presents the best view of the Sphere itself. I was very high during the show and spaced out for much of it, which I guess is what all the music they play and visuals they present is kind of meant for. But I was anxious going in there because I thought, could this be the next night where yet another homicidal maniac goes off and shoots and blows up a bunch of people like they did on October 1 at Mandalay Bay a few years ago? Now, I know that was a much different environmental setting since people were outside for that and were being fired upon from another building, but that's not the point. I got the sense something crazy was going to happen, and something did. Wasn't quite worthy of making headlines, but someone standing near us fainted out of nowhere, and it was probably only 30 or 40 minutes into the show. Now, I'm not trying to compare one person losing consciousness for what we hope was just a temporary period to hundreds of people getting shot and or killed, but it was still kind of sick. I felt like something stressful related to human life was coming, and I was correct. But once that happened, rather than hope the person who just passed out would be okay, I just felt relieved. I was like, okay, phew, false alarm. There's not going to be a massacre. Just one unlucky bloke passing out. No idea if it was a man or woman. Anyway, so yeah, if you like concerts, and I've been to very few concerts, go see a gig at the Sphere. It's totally awesome. So here's an old story that randomly popped into mind the other day, and I'm glad it did because it is the number one all-time top display of poker piece of shitness I've ever seen. I've told you stories about women calling me a misogynist in front of the whole table because I called time on her for taking longer to make a decision than her most recent menstruation cycle took to pass. I think that's what they call it. I've told you stories about other women with way too much lip filler threatening me at the table with Krav Maga because she knew no matter how big my lips were that I couldn't say anything back to her. I've told stories about unthinkable knit rolls and whiny crybabies, obnoxious assholes who never shut up and slow roll and never stop trying to get on everybody's nerves. There have been people who got upset with me for not celebrating after winning a big pot. Then there was the guy bending over backwards, standing on his head so he can get out showing his hand first so that he's guaranteed to see mine. And on we go. I don't need to go through them all again. The point is, I've already spoken of a fair number of instances where human beings were behaving lower than whale shit since, sooner or later, poker was guaranteed to bring that out of them. But this next instance sits atop them all by itself. And if there was ever an incident inside of a casino where I could redo everything, this would be it. And the story itself is not even that long. So I'd say this was around 2010 or 11, making me 25 or 26. I didn't play that much 2-5 in these times, probably only about 10 hours a month. But I was playing it on this day, and why does that not seem like a coincidence? I was at the Wynn before it became my main room, and it was in their old poker room before they moved it to the Encore side. And the table I was on was right next to the entrance of the poker room. So you got the railing right behind it. I don't remember any of the hand's action besides that it was a multi-way pot. The flop was 3 numbers, figure 9 high at the highest. There were 2 spades, and I had king, queen of spades. Some white, middle-aged looking guy bet. He was probably in his 50s. Bushy mustache, kind of heavy, ugly face, wearing some stupid baseball hat that isn't of a baseball team. So basically what a good 35% of the Americans who play 2-5 look like. Anyway, so he bets. I go all in for a lot. It folds back to him and he snap calls. All right, time to get there. But before the dealer puts out the turn and river, I don't know what he was doing. Maybe he was pulling the bets in, whatever it was. It apparently gave this guy enough time to get up from his seat and walk a few seconds. Where did he walk? Well, technically, he left the poker room. He took a few steps to the right of the room's entrance and was now leaning against the railing and looking out over the railing and at the table, which was very easy to see from where he was standing. So now the dealer deals, and the turn was a spade, so I hit the flush, and the river was nothing. It didn't pair the board. So I got the second nuts, and I turn it over. And now this guy starts pointing at the table and my cards and asking from behind the railing, "What's he got? What's he got? What's he got?" And people are telling him. Now, this is the moment where if I could have redone what I did, I'd have redone what I did. And what I would have and should have done is taken his 2 hole cards, which were still right next to me, still face down, of course, and just mucked them myself. Throw them in the pile with the rest of the other folded cards at my own accord to end the hand and declare this pot mine, because just what the fuck exactly kind of horseshit is this mongrel wasting our time with right now? Now, when it was happening in real time, I just remember feeling really confused as to what the hell was going on. And I think I remember saying to him before the turn and river were dealt, or it could have been after, but I think I sarcastically said something along the lines of, do you want to see what happens here, or would it interest you to be present for this? I mean, we are all in here, but no matter what his cards were, his behavior, just for acting like this, was already worthy of having somebody, anybody, including the dealer, but especially myself, muck his cards without any additional consent, because he already consented to that when he vacated not only his seat during this all-in, which was easily at least a pot of $2,000, probably more, but when he vacated the poker room itself. There is always a line that separates one thing from the next thing, no matter what the thing we're talking about is. For example, when you're a 12-year-old boy, you're either standing in the girls' bathroom or you are not standing in the girls' bathroom. But once you have crossed the line that separates the one thing from the next thing, you have crossed the line. And that's what he did, literally and figuratively. Where he was standing, he was not in the poker room. So I should have just mucked his cards. It wasn't like he had even begun to make an effort to come back. But I didn't think to do that because I wasn't somebody who thought that other people would think to do what he was doing. So I simply had no response for it. So rather than throw his cards in face down, I turned his fucking hand over like I'm his butler and you already know what he had. This puke pile of cunt shit has ace-10 of spades for the stone nuts and is now responsible for the most vicious, dirtiest, and obnoxious slow roll I'll ever take or bear witness to. He had left the room, but he hadn't gone so far that, he couldn't see anything. He saw exactly what I had, and he knew exactly what was going on and what he was doing, but instead of remaining in, or standing right next to his seat for this all-in like every other person on the planet would have done, and then turned over his winning hand once he knows he's supposed to. Instead, he plays this little victory of his as far to the hill as you can possibly play it. Now, like I said, he went outside before the turn and river were dealt, so he was probably just, really getting really into the sweat. But what about after the turn and river were dealt, huh? What's his excuse for still standing out there and putting on this whole show, huh? What's he doing this for? Now, in terms of the equity, I mean, I got the money in quite badly, so it's not like he got lucky to wind up with a better hand than me. But he did get lucky that I wasn't thinking about being as cutthroat as I should have been and just mucked his fucking hand like he absolutely deserved me to. The guy left the poker room. He completely abandoned his hand. I don't care how far away he was. Now, had I mucked his hand, I have no doubt that this man would have attacked me, and he was a lot taller than me, too. But either way, I wasn't going to fight someone in the poker room in the win. I mean, come on. I would have just run around the table and let him chase me until someone stops him. Because after I turned his cards over, essentially slow-rolling myself with his hand, I started giving him shit about it, and so were other people, and then he got really angry, like threateningly angry. So if he's going to act that way after his plan already worked to perfection, what do you think he would have done if I had just mucked his cards and stolen, in his mind, this huge pot away from him? A pot so huge that he couldn't even just stay in his seat for it. Now, I have no idea what possessed this, and there isn't even a word for him, to premeditate this whole show, because we hadn't gotten into it about anything. He was sitting on my right, and that was it. We never even spoke. So I had thought we were just playing poker. But as I said, I was in my mid-20s, so maybe this was just his envious dinosaur hatred. Finally getting to take a stab at someone in the younger generation of poker players, as so many little boys his age, who pretend they're men, did and still do. Because these little boys, who never grew up besides getting older, have been playing for decades, and whether they were barely winning or doing better than that, don't like the fact that there's now this new and huge influx of younger players who have suddenly and totally outclassed them with aggression and unpredictability. And these aging nobodies also decided, with their bitter, one-track-minded level of simpleton play, that the new kids are just lucky. And now that he has a chance to really rub one in, he's going to do so to the most imaginative level I've ever seen anyone take it. And once again, because I've made this point before, if these pea-brain miserable fucks would allocate just a fraction of the time they spend trying to figure out what's the deepest they can cut, what's the deepest they can stick the knife in somebody when they are finally about to drag a big one. If they put any amount of time towards improving their understanding in actual play of poker as they put in towards being complete dickless pricks, maybe they wouldn't have become so outclassed so quickly. But I don't know why he felt the need to do all this. That's just speculation, but there are plenty of guys like that, and he very well could have been one of them. All I know is it would have been a hell of a sight to see had I mucked his nut flush with him standing outside the poker room, pointing at the table and asking what I have when he can already see it. And right after this ordeal was over with, another player said to me that he thought I was going to muck his hand. And I said I should have. And I wish I'd thought of that, but that I didn't, because I don't think to do things like that, because at that age, I didn't quite know yet just how low some people were capable of going when playing poker. Oh well, I guess I'll just do that next time. Still waiting for the opportunity. But until then, I just pray to whatever God that in all likelihood doesn't exist, that if and when I'm this miscreant's age, that I'm not even 1 ounce of how discontented he must be to pull a stunt like that. Holy shit. But let's play what if for a couple minutes. Suppose I did muck his hand. After he's done attacking me and having his explosive outburst about how he had the nuts and should be given the pot and I should be 86 because I intentionally mucked his cards. Once the floor comes over to resolve that, what would the floor do and what should the floor do in this hypothetical? Well, first we have to assume that his mucked cards ended up not retrievable because we've all seen it in other clusterfucks where someone's cards hit the muck but are then retrieved and turned over because they weren't mixed in with the other cards. We could all still see which 2 exact face-down cards were the ones that were inappropriately and almost mucked. We've all seen that. So let's assume his cards would have been mucked beyond any retrieval, and that the only hand remaining now is mine, and it's faced up, and also happens to be the second nut flush. What is the floor supposed to do? Well, it's easy for me to say this since I was the one who lost the hand, but seriously, in my total objective opinion, this man should not be given anything, and for more than one reason. Starting with, it is always every player's responsibility to protect their own hand. Each poker room has its unique set of rules for the cash games, and a lot of them are really inconsistent and stupid, but I guarantee you they all agree on that. You have to protect your own hand. Well, not only did he not protect his own hand, he made no such attempt at doing so. He went about as far out of his way as he could to make sure his hand wasn't protected. If all this time he was sitting next to me, only to then have me shock him and the table when in one rapid fell swoop I decide to muck his cards, then I think it's pretty obvious who fucked up here and what should be done, and whose hand should and now will be declared dead. But that's not what happened here. He didn't protect his hand because he vacated the poker room completely. I don't care that he was still looking at the table and pointing to the cards and asking what I had. He left the poker room. So if something happens to his hand, such as it hitting the muck for one reason or another, then his hand should be dead because he made no effort whatsoever to protect it. So I don't see how a floor could rule any other way once his cards are mucked and there's no proof that he had a better hand than mine. I think we would all know he's telling the truth because he'd be going totally nuclear, but it doesn't matter. So I guess the moral of the story would just be, if you're all in, don't leave the poker room. Because imagine if I'd mucked his cards and gotten the pot. Imagine him telling his wife later what happened. So after I went all in, I left the poker room, and the guy I was playing the hand with mucked my cards when I had the nuts, and they let him have the pot. Can you believe that? Then perhaps she'd have asked him, well, dear, then why did you leave the poker room while you were all in? So this asshole not only beat me, but his jerk-off behavior went completely unpunished and was carried out to the max. I mean, no wonder I started this fucking podcast, because who could go through shit like this every day? God! Why the fuck did I have to be nice in this situation? Why the fuck didn't I just think, fuck this fucking Nifkin and muck his cards? And it would have been the perfect thing to do, because even though I didn't know it at the time, I was free-rolling the whole situation anyway. He had the winning hand. So if I get even $1 back, I'm ahead of the game. But once his cards are turned over and the winning hand is visible, there's nothing more that can be done. I never even called the floor. I don't think anyone called the floor. I mean, I knew I had no leg to stand on. Least of all after I'm the one who's turning over the cards of the person that I am now about to double up. And he still got angry. Who are these flaming bags of shit, and why do they play poker? When he meets up with his other shithead friends to drink more beer and sulk some more about how his dick doesn't work anymore, is this what he's going to tell them? Tell them what he did today? You know, sometimes I think I have no life. and I'm just a useless neurotic existence, but I sure get a welcoming reality check and reminder that I could do a lot worse when I come across motherfuckers like this. Anyway, so the World Series of Poker isn't too far off. It's just a few more weeks. It's no longer a recent story, but Phil Hellmuth announced that he will not be playing in the $10,000 main event tournament because it's too long and is too demanding for it to be worthwhile to him now at the grand old age of 60 and very close to 61 by the time the tournament starts. Now, if I had to guess, I'd say this is more about Hellmuth lobbying for the event to be less grueling in some way than him not actually being able to do it. I think if he had to play, he could. But either way, it doesn't matter because I agree. It has gotten ridiculous. And it's been ridiculous. And that while everyone who shows up to play can't stop salivating over the millions of dollars they all think they're going to win, they all get woken up by reality when they realize they're going to have to put in 13-hour days over and over and over, and which is probably not something they ever do any other time of year for any activity. So then it all just becomes about a test of raw endurance, even more than their poker skills. Now, none of this affects me because I haven't bought into a tournament since the World Series of Poker in 2013. I played the main event and lost on day 2, and I have not bought into another event since. So I'm pushing 12 years of tournament sobriety, and I'm still loving it. And it's been easy because I have, for so long, seen the tournament glass as half empty. And by half empty, I mean more like 95% empty. But when I played the main event that year and the year before in 2012, when I cashed, coming in 371st place and got knocked out on day 4 of like 8, might have even been more than that, I don't remember. But both times, I signed up for day 1A instead of B or C or D or Z because everyone who survived day 1A got 2 days off instead of 1 going into day 2A or B. Even with it being early in the event, I still wanted to rest as much as possible between days I had to play. And that includes not playing freaking cash on the days off. It always blows my mind when I hear about people doing that. And even during dinner breaks of tournaments they're currently in. And a ton of people do it. And for the life of me, I will never get it. If I'm playing a big buy-in event as prestigious as the main event, or really any huge MTT, for as long as I'm in, that is all I am interested in focusing on and giving any energy to. And I am taking all the rest that's there. Now, after my day 2A was completed, I had one more off day going into day 3. So that meant day 4 was the first day I played without having at least one off day before it. And I felt the fatigue. I was only 27, but I'd never played anywhere close to this number of hours in an MTT, and it was wearing on me. Now, my threshold for hours has definitely always been lower than most regs, but any other cash game player isn't necessarily putting in consecutive 13-hour days year-round either. And if they are, it's still different because it's at their own accord entirely, unlike with the tournament. But I felt the fatigue, and it showed in a couple spots too. And then the next year, I got through day 1A, but on the second of the 2 days off, before day 2, I went out at night knowing full well I'm going against my prerogative. Now, I didn't party until 6 in the morning. In fact, I really didn't do anything worth talking about, but I know I'd have been better off just staying home and not moving a muscle. Because I didn't play that well on day 2 of 2013, and gee, what do you know, I got knocked out. I know variance plays a huge role in these things too, but the point is, when multi-table tournaments were created, I don't think that this is what the MTT founders ever envisioned or even imagined could happen. Tournaments were invented with the expectation and vision of there being like maybe a few dozen people playing, or a whole lot less than that. But something that can be settled in one day, maybe 2, if you feel like making it more dramatic. But we're past a few dozen people. Now we're doing this with at least 10,000 people, and it's fucking bizarre. It's just fucking weird. I've heard suggestions from those who also agree with Hellmuth that the main event is too long and that they should just shorten the blind levels to 90 minutes, down from 2 hours. And while that would probably speed things up considerably, I don't think that's what the World Series of Poker should do. I don't even play the event, but I really love that the levels are so long that it makes the variance as low as possible and really give the great players their best shot at showing how great they are. So I think the solution is simple. Just add more off days. Don't make anybody play more than 2 days in a row. The event is already obscenely long, so what's the fucking difference at this point if it's 3 or 4 extra days to let people rest and recover? Because like I said, when tournaments started, I doubt anyone ever thought there'd be 30,000 people showing up to these like they do in that stupid $400 Colossus tournament or whatever the fuck they call it. People always look at me wide-eyed when I tell them how long it's been since I've last bought into a tournament because they probably can't believe how long I've resisted the temptation, but it hasn't really even been that tempting. Now, 4 years ago is when I played my last tournament. It wasn't 2013. I played because I was given a free roll and he was going to give me 50% of whatever I won, and it was a bounty tournament. So, of course, I'm not going to say no to that. I'm not that stupid. But I got knocked out after about 6 hours on day 1 of 3, and it was right before the dinner break. And I was more tilted from losing this tournament that it didn't cost me a penny to play in than I had been in the last 8 years of playing cash, because that's how unnerving tournaments are. Every time I lose, and of course you usually do, I always feel so unsatisfied and like I just wasted my time trying to hit a lottery ticket. Now, there's so many things about tournaments that turn me off, and it's been accumulating over the years. First of all, it seems like almost every tournament now allows you to rebuy up until a certain point. And that started years ago. But that right there already changed the whole game, because for me, the whole allure of a tournament was the fact that we all buy in with the same number of chips, and once we are all hunting with one bullet. And once you're out, you're out. There's no coming back in as many times as you want until it's 2 o'clock. When you lose, you lose. That's what I want tournaments to be like. And then there's the late reg option too. You can buy into a tournament well after the event starts. You get the same starting stack as you would if you showed up with a first hand. The only disadvantage is the blinds are much higher, so your variance is going to be higher. And obviously, you'll have had to forego the opportunity to run your stack up, but there's also already going to be all these people who are already knocked out, and you haven't even taken a hand yet. Now, it's not that this alone bothers me enough to keep me from playing, but I still don't like it. I liked tournaments in their original format, but now it's just built around how the house can rake the most in entry fees. But what's kept me disinterested the most in tournaments is the payout structure. Even now, they still pay so few players, and so few players win anything significant. The World Series of Poker used to only pay 10% of the entrants. And it's been 15% for some time now, and I think that's used a lot more often in general also, but I still think that's way too little. Especially when you consider how top-heavy the payouts are. How many times I've said to people, the top prize at the main event is usually what? It's like 10 million? Thereabouts? And what does ninth place get? What does the first player knocked out at the final table win? Like 1 million? Are you trying to tell me that the person who bested, say, 10,000 people and won the tournament achieved 10 times as much as the person who came in ninth, besting 9,991 people? Is that really 10 times the achievement? So it's just a joke. You have to run so fucking far in these things to win huge. So it just makes me not want to play. And when poker blew up in 2003, ESPN did a really great job of selling to everyone with the mountains of chips and the top prize of piles of cash spread across the table that you could be the next champion. Meanwhile, tournaments would be so much more worthwhile and fair if coming in like 125th place paid something really solid, really, really solid, and that if the very top spots, starting with the final table, were balanced out far more evenly so that it would be congruent with how substantial the achievement actually is. Because the demoralizing emotions that come with tournaments, especially if you fuck up, stay with you forever or close to it. Because each turn of variance or error in thinking costs you so much more than it should, so it's just another thing, and the most important thing, that keeps me away from them. If the payouts were 1,000,000 times more fair, I know I would have considered playing them a lot more these last bunch of years. But it's not. So altogether, the emotional EV of playing tournaments is awful. Then you throw in the fact that no one really knows what the hourly can even be because you got to factor in taxes. So I just think cash game poker is infinitely better for your emotions and probably for your actual EV anyway. Slow and steady wins the race. But so many people are so tickled by getting the enormous life-changing score one day, and plus there's a lot more notoriety in tournaments. Cash game players are celebrated a lot more than they used to be, but the fame is still mostly in the tournaments. But either way, you could grind tournaments every year for 10 years, hating life most of the time. Then maybe one day in year 10, you finally hit your big one. You look up, and now you finally got your $1,000,000. Or you could grind cash every year for 10 years, hating life less of the time, spending a lot of time winning and gradually making money and spreading it out however you want. Then look up during year 10 and see you got your $1,000,000, just like the tournament player finally got his. Only your emotional path in getting there was 1,000,000 times less awful. Now, I know some people show up with no experience and just ship their first tournament easy game. It's not like it's going to take you 10 years. Could take more, could take less. But you cannot just plan on it being you to be the next guy to just show up and win for no fucking reason. I mean, anything can happen, but you're going to have to give me a better reason than that to get me to play. So, to each his own, but fuck tournaments. I don't think I've played more than 25 lifetime, and that includes fields of only 50 or 60 people. But it was still enough for me to get why people like them. They are interesting and exciting once you get near and in the money, but so what? Cash is so much more challenging in terms of developing skills and just maturing as a player overall. The stacks are so much deeper, so there's so much more room for creative maneuverability. Tournaments far more typically have a correct play, and so much of the decision-making is just pre-flop and flop. As you get into the real meaningful stages of the tournament, there's relatively little turn and river play. In tournaments, they tell you when to come in, when to go home, when to take a break. Cash game players have to make that decision, but they also get to make that decision. And tournament players never have to pull themselves off the table when they're having a rough day. They're never faced with that responsibility, and that's just part of why tournament players have such reputations of being huge fish at cash, even though that obviously is not going to apply to all of them. So I just don't care about tournaments. I've won a little bit at them, but they don't interest me. And then when you throw in the ICM factor, accounting for what your stack is actually worth at a certain juncture in the tournament and when you're approaching pay jumps, and then realizing you have to fold or go with certain hands at very particular times because of all the ICM implications. It takes some of the magic away. And it's fine that it does. I think it's great that they discovered the importance of ICM because it's just deepened the understanding needed for excelling at tournaments. But there's just one more thing that keeps me away because I don't want to be in a tournament without having a solid understanding of ICM. And I know it's going to take a bit of effort to get that, and I don't feel like making that effort. And it's hard enough to accomplish anything in tournaments as is, so if I'm not entering the field in a very high percentile of how good everybody is, then I don't want to do it. But above all else, I just like pure, straight-up, pound-for-pound poker. Every hand. No pay jumps. No blinds increasing in 5 minutes. No 20 big blind stacks for hours at a time. We're playing deep here. So there's no ICM of any kind. Nothing. Just good old-fashioned poker. No late registration. No re-entries to something that some people are only firing one bullet at. Just nice and simple. But tournaments, it's one plot twist after another. And I might be able to tolerate them if the pay structures were a million times more sensible, but they're not. So, thanks, but no thanks. Anyway, that'll do for this week. I think I'm going to play this week. I think the road ahead is finally clear enough that I'm not going to keep making excuses for not grinding. So I just might get back on track for the umpteenth time. We'll see you next time.